Welcome to the February 3rd session of the Phoenix Congress, where we are writing a blueprint for a better America. This legislative package will end poverty with universal basic income and mass incarceration with major criminal justice reform, and end the endless wars by bringing our troops home and reducing our military budget. Today's session is the 6th of 21 public hearings on the 2022 legislative package, and we'll review sections 141 through 148 relative to ending the federal war on drugs. These sessions will alternate between Mondays and Thursdays at 1:30 p.m. Eastern through March 28th. For those following along at home, you can find a link to the legislative package in the description below or at bit.ly/B or capital B, capital B, capital A, lowercase Dropbox. If you'd like to submit a question in the chat, please indicate which of today's sections it applies to. And if you'd like to offer questions or other testimony for future hearings, please use the link in the description below. One of the goals of this legislative package is to help America get back to our constitutional duties. And so we'd like to start these hearings by reciting the preamble to the Constitution as a reminder. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. With that, I'd like to welcome the delegate from North Carolina's 4th District to continue his testimony on the blueprint for a better America.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Brian. I'm an organizer with the American Union and a Phoenix Congress delegate in good standing, representing what is expected to be North Carolina's 4th District in the 2022 election. Today, we're going to start the Weldon-Angelos Justice Act and ending the drug war. This has been an issue that's been on my radar for since back in the 90s, when a guy named Peter McWilliams wrote a book called Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do. And, you know, when I was in school, I went through the DARE program and all that. And sure, drugs are bad. I don't think, you know, we're not arguing that. But he, in his book, Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do, he raised the question, well, why should somebody be incarcerated for the choices that they make about what they put in their body? And he laid it out in a pretty compelling and convincing way that I never looked at the war on drugs the same way. He lived in California, and he had cancer and was participating in the medical marijuana program out in California. And federal government swooped in to bust him. And in order for him to get out of jail, he had to agree not to use marijuana. That was keeping his nausea at bay. And so they found him dead, choked on his own vomit in June of that year. And there's a lot of people all over this country who've been victims of the war on drugs. And you know, this legislative package to end poverty, end mass incarceration, and end the endless wars. The drug war has been going on for over 50 years. And 83% of Americans agree that it is a failure. So the question is not whether or not we should acknowledge it. The question is when. When will we do something about it? When will we change course? And justice delayed is justice denied. There is no reason why we shouldn't be changing course right now. And so we have the opportunity to do that in 2022 by ending the federal war on drugs. I'd just like to read the findings from section 141 into the record. The subtitle will be cited as the Weldon-Angelos Justice Act. The Congress finds the following. 1. In the 50 years since Congress' enactment of the Controlled Substances Act, which authorized and launched the harsh drug war policy sought by the Nixon administration, the United States has adopted increasingly punitive policies towards the possession, use, and distribution of drugs. The United States has built a massive regime to enforce those policies. 2. Congress and state legislatures have adopted increasingly harsh sentencing schemes, such as mandatory minimums, established far-reaching and oppressive civil sanctions and collateral consequences, approved policies weakening the Fourth Amendment for drug searches and seizures, and fostered incentives for aggressive and militarized policing in the alleged pursuit of drugs. 3. Every year, there are more than 1.4 million arrests in the United States for drug-related offenses. In over 85% of those arrests, drug possession was the most serious offense. Drug arrests disproportionately impact people of color and more commonly occur in historically over-policed low-income communities. A criminal record, even for an arrest that did not result in a conviction, has a profound impact on individuals, often interrupting employment, housing, family relationships, child custody, and education. 4. A health-based approach to drug use and overdose is more effective, humane, and cost-effective than criminal punishments. Subjecting people to criminal penalties, stigma, and other lasting collateral consequences because they use drugs is expensive, ruins lives, and can make access to treatment and recovery more difficult. 5. Despite high numbers of arrests and incarceration in the United States for drug possession, the number and rate of drug-involved overdose deaths has skyrocketed for over 20 years and continues at epidemic levels. In the first year of the pandemic, 100,000 people died by drug overdose in the United States. 6. Harm reduction services and voluntary on-demand access to evidence-based substance use disorder treatment have proven highly effective in reducing overdose and the spread of communicable diseases like HIV and hepatitis C, preventing drug-related injury and improving health outcomes for people who use drugs. These services should be available on demand to anyone who requests them. 7. Far too many people who desire treatment face challenges that prevent them from accessing the services they want, including cost barriers, lack of providers, and long wait lists. On-demand access to evidence-based treatment saves lives, reduces crime, and saves money. 8. Criminalizing drug use and possession reduces the amount of resources available for harm reduction and treatment services and deters people from accessing available services due to fear of arrest. 9. Punitive policies have achieved no reduction in supplies or prices, but instead have created unnecessarily risky and harmful conditions for people who use drugs. 10. Punitive policies have led to militarized tactics that thwart the spirit of the Constitution and have led to the deaths of innocent civilians. Additionally, the drug war apparatus has cost the federal government hundreds of billions of dollars in direct enforcement and incarceration costs. 11. While drug legalization cannot fully repair our broken and oppressive criminal legal system or the harms from 50 years of the war on drugs, it will help restore individual liberty, protect against some police abuses, better assist those in need, and save tax dollars. 12. In this moment, Congress recognizes that drug prohibition has failed just as alcohol prohibition did, and it is time to move the country in a new direction. This section closes with a sense of Congress. It is the sense of Congress that incarcerating or otherwise subjecting an individual to criminal penalties solely for recreational drug use is not justice, which the preamble to the Constitution requires be established by the people of the United States. I think, Ms. Chair, that concludes my testimony for section 141, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, we do have a question from Tony in California. Wouldn't this be better branded as decriminalization of nonviolent drug offenses?
Thank you for the question. Maybe it would be better branded as decriminalization, but that's not exactly what this is. So I guess we should just talk about terminology. Decriminalization means that something is against the law, but there's no criminal sanction for it. So think of jaywalking or getting a speeding ticket, right? You're not going to have a criminal offense on your record, but it's still against the law and you can still be penalized. And so decriminalizing drugs, as many states have decriminalized marijuana, if not legalized it, is still like in New Hampshire and North Carolina. It's still against the law to possess marijuana, even if there's no criminal penalty. This legislative package will end the federal war on drugs. It doesn't apply to state laws. So if it's a criminal offense or a decriminalized in the state that you are in, that won't change by the passage of this act. What will change is the federal restrictions. So that's part of the answer. The other part is that by legalizing it, we can bring a lot of the underground activity, in the same way that we dealt with alcohol prohibition, right? Alcohol prohibition caused an awful lot of gang violence. And when we legalized it, we collected tax revenue. We made it easier for people to seek treatment, and nobody gets shot over a six-pack anymore. We don't have open alcohol markets. It's regulated, and during alcohol prohibition, we had 10,000 people died from drinking wood alcohol. The saving grace was that if you felt yourself starting to go blind and you started throwing up as quickly as you could, it might save your life. And so we have that same problem today with the war on drugs, where people don't know what they're getting when they buy something off the street. We see a lot of fentanyl overdoses. And so by legalizing it and opening up the opportunity to treat this as a health problem instead of a criminal problem, we will save countless lives. But to do that, you've got to be able to legalize it and regulate, and that's what this legislative package builds a framework for.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, section 141 is assigned to the Subcommittee on Findings. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Section 142. All right, this is where we get into the meat of ending the federal drug war. As I said, 83% of Americans agreed that the war on drugs is a failure. 65% agree that it's time to end it. 66% support getting rid of criminal penalties for drug possession. Again, drug use is not harmless, but drug prohibition is worse. Sorry. Drug prohibition is worse than it destroys families, has a huge cost on society, and it's devastated many communities. So what this bill does is it repeals the Controlled Substances Act and the other parts of the United States Code that we get the federal government out of the drug prohibition business. And I mean business. CNBC recently reported that America has spent over $1 trillion fighting the war on drugs over the last 50 years. It's big business. And tens of thousands of Americans serve in this war. It impacts a lot of our foreign policy. It impacts a lot of people around the world. And we need a better policy. So let's do that. I'm going to try sharing my screen here. And yeah. All right. So we repeal a whole bunch of drug offenses, and I just want to go through these kind of quickly so that there's clarity. When you read the legislative package, you'll be able to click on these and see exactly what it is that's being repealed. But briefly, number one here, this is the section of the Budget Act that makes it illegal for Washington, D.C. To enact their own drug policy because they're under Congress's control. So this would get rid of that. Number two is the definition of aggravated felony, and it takes out the drug trafficking part of that definition. Number three, these are the sections where the Secretary of Agriculture is supposed to prevent the growing of marijuana in the national forest system. Number four shows right here exactly what we're doing. We're just scratching out the drug trafficking crime from that definition. Same thing for number five, just crossing out the reference to the narcotics and controlled substances. Number six deals with drugs coming in on ships. Number seven, this is the Controlled Substances Act, 50 years old, and it's had its day. It's time for it to go. Number eight, these are mostly have already been moved elsewhere, but they contain the congressional findings back in 1980, and so like the findings that I just read, back then they found that, quote, Although Congress observed a significant apparent reduction in the rate of increase of drug abuse during the 3-year period subsequent to March 21st, 1972, and in certain areas of the country, apparent temporary reductions in its incidence, the increase in spread of heroin consumption since 1974 and the continuing abuse of other dangerous drugs clearly indicate the need for effective, ongoing, and highly visible federal leadership in the formation and execution of a comprehensive, coordinated drug abuse policy. 40 years, that's 40 years old. And insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Number 9 deals with the office of getting rid of the Office of National Drug Control Policy. 10 is findings for this chapter. 11, again, you can see it right here, exactly what we're crossing out, the redefining substance use and misuse to just mean misuse, and adding for the prevention part, where we currently relates to legal substances of alcohol and tobacco, adding drugs. In Title 21, the number 12, again, is Office of National Drug Control Policy, getting rid of that. Number 13 deals with international narcotics trafficking. Number 14 is sanctions on opioid traffickers. Number 15 is an interesting one. This is a law that Congress passed that withholds highway funds unless states have a law on the books for a mandatory 6-month suspension of a driver's license for any drug offense conviction. Or if you don't have a driver's license when you're convicted, a mandatory 6-month delay when you do apply for a driver's license. But then there's a loophole in it, and it says the Congress or the legislature could just pass a resolution saying they oppose this, and it doesn't count. In any case, I'm kind of curious about which states have done, which route they've taken, but it doesn't matter. It's unnecessary and should be repealed. Number 16 is the subchapter in the violent crimes control chapter that's related to drugs. 17, we've talked about the Burn Grant Program a number of times during these hearings, and these are the grants that the Attorney General makes according to the states, and they can be used for any of these programs. And so we're amending what they can be used for. Law enforcement programs, yes, except those targeting drug offenses, and where they're currently able to be used for drug treatment and enforcement programs, where you scratch out the and enforcement. And number 18, this repeals the chapter on maritime drug law enforcement. We can do this. We can get rid of this top-down war on drugs and see this as a states' rights issue. States ought to be able to set their own drug policies, and this legislative package will enable that. Sort of the same way that we deal with prostitution. Prostitution is not a federal crime. Almost every state, except for Nevada, makes it illegal, but it's a states' rights thing. I guess one of the other things I wanted to mention is that the war on drugs also leads to a failure of imagination. I was reading San Francisco this weekend, talking about why progressives ruin cities. And the issues that the author points out in San Francisco is, by not arresting people for drug use, then you've allowed it creates the opportunity for open air drug markets kind of things. And so he argues, well, you should go back to busting those and force the drug sales back inside, just so they're not in the public view. And there's a failure of imagination. The author can't conceive that maybe drugs shouldn't be illegal, and instead they should be regulated and taxed like alcohol, like tobacco, so that we can address these things strictly as a health issue instead of as a criminal problem. The last thing that I want to do in this with this section is conclude by reading a short passage from The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And she writes in her conclusion, If we become serious about dismantling the system of mass incarceration, we must end the war on drugs. There is no way around it. The drug war helped to birth this system of mass incarceration and create a vast new undercaste. There is no path to liberation for communities of color that includes this ongoing war. Ending the drug war is no simple task, however. It cannot be accomplished through a landmark court decision, an executive order, a single stroke of the presidential pen, unless, of course, it's part of a big legislative package. Since 1982, the war has raged like a forest fire set with a few matches and a gallon of gasoline. What began as an audacious federal program has spread to every state in the nation and nearly every city. It has infected law enforcement activities on roads, sidewalks, highways, train stations, airports, the nation's border. It has effectively shredded portions of the United States Constitution, eliminating Fourth Amendment protections once deemed inviolate. And it has militarized police practices in inner cities across America. Racially targeted drug law enforcement practices, taken together with laws that specifically discriminate against people with drug convictions in employment, housing, and public benefits, have relegated the majority of Black men in urban areas across the United States to a permanent second-class status. If we hope to end this system of control, we cannot be satisfied with a handful of reforms. All of the financial incentives granted to law enforcement to arrest poor Black and brown people for drug offenses must be revoked. Federal grant money for drug enforcement must end. Drug forfeiture laws must be stripped from the books. Racial profiling must be eradicated. The concentration of drug busts in poor communities of color must cease. And the transfer of military equipment and aid to local law enforcement agencies waging the drug war must come to a screeching halt. And that's just for starters. Black and brown people in ghetto communities must no longer be viewed as the designated enemies. And ghetto communities must no longer be treated like occupied zones. A compassionate, humane approach to the problems of the urban poor must replace the punitive practices and policies that have multiplied the harms associated with poverty and racial oppression. This legislative package doesn't do 100% of those things, but it does an awful lot and puts us on the path to really ending mass incarceration in America. And with that, Mixed Chair, that concludes my testimony for Section 142, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Yes, we have several questions. So we have a question from Tony in California. Repealing the Controlled Substances Act would also mean a drastic decrease in police funding handed down from the federal level. Won't that most likely be opposed by civic governments who depend on the additional funding to inflate their budgets?
Probably. This isn't about protecting profits and budgets. This is about what's doing right for the people. This is about establishing justice. And the drug war is very unjust. So yeah, civic governments may oppose this, but the goal is to let the people pool their votes and force Congress to enact this. So.
Fantastic. We have a question from Chareth Cute Story in Phoenix. Does the maritime drug law apply after you're 3 miles out to sea?
Yeah, you should probably consult a maritime lawyer to be absolutely sure. But the current law says it applies even if the act is committed outside the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. So if you're an American on a boat anywhere manufacturing or distributing a controlled substance, the drug law, the law says that you're subject to United States drug laws.
I have a question. How do you see this affecting the black market drug trade specifically, or particularly with foreign drug cartels? What do you think the kind of end line effect would end up being?
Well, the goal, the same way that when we ended alcohol prohibition, we brought all that underground trade above ground. The goal would be the same thing. If the people of Afghanistan want to grow poppies, then okay, let them do that and let them sell a legal product in the international market instead of what we do now, or what we did for 20 years in Afghanistan, which was try and destroy the poppy growing efforts and we failed miserably to do it. And in fact, it increased, I think, 4 times, 400% over the 20-year war. But yeah, I definitely see this becoming, an international trade just like anything else. And the taxes on it channeled into harm reduction and providing treatment services for those who need it.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, section 142 is assigned to the subcommittee on the Weldon Angelos Justice Act. You may proceed to section 143.
Thank you. Section 143 is pretty straightforward. It just deals with its retroactivity, and all those repeals in the previous section are retroactive. They apply to any offense committed, case pending, conviction entered, anything before the date of enactment of this act. So if you've been charged with a drug crime and you can drag out your trial date until after the enactment of this, then that, and it was a federal charge, then that federal crime would be wiped off the books and you wouldn't have to worry about it. Yeah, so section 143 is just about retroactivity, and I think that concludes my testimony on that.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, section 143 is assigned to the subcommittee on the Weldon Angelos Justice Act. You may proceed to section 144.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Section 144 is also very short. It just says banking is not prohibited. You might remember from the hearing on civil asset forfeiture, the armored car company that got stopped 5 times in the last year, never got issued a ticket, no arrests made. They just had $1 million in cash confiscated from their cars. And again, the reason they were moving all that cash was because of the banking laws. That because the marijuana is illegal on the federal level, banks that have federal charters are very leery of accepting money that is, related to unlawful activity, because there are big penalties, potential 20-year jail sentences, prison sentences, and so let's fix that problem. And again, bring the underground trade into the legal market, and emphasize that banking is not prohibited. There's actually legislation that's floating on Congress that would fix this for marijuana, but surprise, Congress doesn't seem to be getting anything done. And that concludes my testimony for section 144.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, section 144 is assigned to the subcommittee on the Weldon Angelos Justice Act. You may proceed to section 145.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, section 145, imposing a sales tax. In short, there's a 12% sales tax on retail sales for any states that opt into legalizing drugs. Again, drug use is not harmless, and if we're going to legalize it, we're going to tax it and regulate it. And so it sets a 12% retail tax. Prescription drugs are exempt. I guess I should say this applies only to recreational drugs, so that were formerly under the Controlled Substances Act. So if your controlled substance is a prescription drug, there's no tax on that. It's just recreational drugs. Of that 12% retail sales tax, 50% of it, the money collected, goes into the U.S. Treasury, and the other half gets divided up to 25% goes to for treatment services, 15% goes to other services to communities that have been impacted by the war on drugs, and the last 10% goes for legal aid in restoring justice for the drug war. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, we'll talk more about some of those details in the next section. So yeah, Mixed Chair, that concludes my testimony for section 145, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a quick question, and maybe you'd be getting into this in the next section. But why 12%?
We looked at like what the other tax rates of other of the jurisdictions that have legalized marijuana around the country. 12% is sort of in the middle. You might know there was a piece of legislation that would have legalized marijuana on the federal level, and it had a 25% retail tax. So we came in at half of that. And where the 12% tax rate came from, that's just what we came up with.
Oh, and I received a similar question from Larry in New York. Where did the 12% tax rate come from, which you just went over, and will it create an underground market?
Will it create an underground market? I mean, certainly there will be a non-zero amount of drugs that are sold outside of the legal market. Same way that there's a non-zero amount of alcohol that's sold outside of the the normal chain of distribution. The question like, is a 12% tax rate enough that people would prefer to buy heroin on the streets and risk a fentanyl overdose rather than buying a product that's tested and regulated? And I say the word safe but you know what I mean when we're talking about heroin. But something that that they know what they're getting. Is 12% enough that they'd be willing to risk their lives? I don't think it is. I mean, I think the vast majority of people prefer to be law-abiding adults as long as the laws, especially when the laws make sense. And so if you have an opportunity to be a law-abiding adult and buy your recreational drugs from a regulated store, the vast majority of people are going to do that. When I was in the New Hampshire legislature, we debated. We were the first legislative chamber to pass a bill legalizing marijuana back in 2013, 2014. And Colorado had just legalized it. And so I had some friends that told me they were going on a road trip from New Hampshire. And, I asked them where they were going. And I said, Colorado. Like, I knew they smoked marijuana in New Hampshire, but they were willing to drive halfway across the country to do it legally, to be law-abiding adults. So will there be an underground market? More than zero, but most people like to follow the laws.
I have another question from Tony in California. If cannabis is part of this, the cannabis industry would fight against it. They have battled against legalization multiple times in California and additional programs that would further cut into their profits, such as an expansion of the industry. I guess it's not really a question, but it is what he submitted. Okay.
Yeah. Again, this isn't about protecting the profits of any industry. So yeah, they're welcome to battle against it and say, it's better that there be a federal drug war if they think that's best for them, but it's not. Yeah, so that I understand that industries who are might lose out on profits under this piece of legislation will not be happy with it, but it's not about protecting profits.
Okay. Seeing no further questions, section 145 is assigned to the subcommittee on the Weldon-Angelos Justice Act. You may proceed to section 146.
All right, thank you. All right, section 146 is the Drug War Restorative Justice Office. I'm going to try and share my screen here again. Yeah, so the drug wars caused a lot of harm, and so some of the funds that are raised from the tax on the sale of recreational drugs goes to the Drug War Restorative Justice Office to try and make things right. And it'll be under the Office of Justice Programs, under the Attorney General. And their functions would be, these are the sort of the percentages that I talked about earlier. Administer the Community Reinvestment Grant Program. Sorry. Yeah, so their responsibility would be to administer the reinvestment grant program, which is these three percentages that I talked about earlier. So 15% to administering services for individuals most adversely impacted by the war on drugs, including job training, reentry services, literacy programs, youth recreation or mentoring programs, and health education programs. Using this tax to offset some of the societal harms caused by drug use. Second thing is administering substance use treatment services this would be providing eligible entities with funds to administer substance use treatment services in a consistently effective manner for any individuals who request such services. So it's got to be done in an effective way. You can't just throw money at organizations and say, here, promise to try and treat people. They'll need to demonstrate their effectiveness in doing so. And the third thing, 10% of the money from the tax on recreational drugs would go to administer legal aid for civil and criminal drug offenses, including expungement of drug convictions. One of their other responsibilities was, as time goes by, make recommendations for rebalancing those percentages to better meet the larger goals of this legislation, and also to submit to Congress a proposed draft of legislation that would implement such technical and conforming amendments that would further clarify and implement the provisions of this section, including any additional repeals.
We may be experiencing technical difficulties. Not sure if it's on my end or. Okay, his screen is still being shared, but we do not have him up. Delegate from North Carolina. I will shoot him a message. Let me put this in the. Okay. Brian has left. But we will just hold on for a moment. I'm sure he will re-enter soon. Or if they shut off his power, maybe. Oh, he's coming back on. Here he comes. Here we go. Here we go. He's coming on. He's getting there. Oh, you're frozen, Brian. You're muted. Oh, are we still connected on this stream? Online. Yep, we are good. Still waiting on Brian. Oh, okay, we're getting, here he comes. The host, go ahead and unmute yourself whenever you're ready, Brian.
All right. Are you getting an echo?
Yeah, we are now. But we've been still live this whole time. I've been on. Yeah, it looks like you're in here twice. So you have a second device connected right now.
I do. I can't figure out how to get out of it. Can you boot me from my second device?
You took over host. Oh, wait, hang on. Your second device is the host right now.
Okay. All right. So where were we?
You had to share your screen.
Yeah. How much of that did you hear on the
pull up your screen and I'll see about where you were at.
Yeah.
We got
screen sharing is disabled, but
it's because you have to switch host. Are you able to make yourself or me host from your other device that's still connected? Oh, okay. There you go. Your other device just left, and so you probably were able to reclaim host. Would be my guess. So you might be able to share content now. There you go.
Okay. Apologies for the technical difficulties.
Scroll up a little bit, I think. Yeah, that's about where you were. Yeah.
Okay.
I think you were getting into. Or wait, right? We're on section 146. We got a decent way into it.
Yeah. Did we?
I don't think
all right.
we're gone for that long.
Did we talk about the three duties of the things they're supposed to be doing? Administering services for individuals before most adversely impacted on by the war on drugs.
I think we were in the middle of talking about number 2. Or no, we had finished number 2. We were on number 3. Yeah, we were just getting around to, I think, the expungement.
Okay, so that's the third thing. That 10% of the money raised by taxes would go towards addressing those issues. Some of the other things, the other responsibilities and duties of function of the Drug War Restorative Justice Office would be to rebalance those percentages from time to time to better serve the needs as things go on. You can imagine, the more states that choose to opt into legalization, taxation, and regulation, the more money that will be coming in, and so we can rebalance those. But the way it's set up right now, the top priority is making sure that treatment services are available to anyone who wants them or needs them. And if there's so much money coming in that we get a handle on that, then that money can be redistributed in other ways. But that's intended to be the top priority to address the harm that drug use can cause. The office would also be responsible for submitting a draft legislation that would better implement the provisions of this section, including any other repeals of any provisions of law that might be mixed into the United States Code that haven't been fixed. With that, Mixed Chair, I think that pretty much does it on this section, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions on section 146, section 146 is assigned to the subcommittee on the Weldon-Angelos Justice Act. You may proceed to section 147.
All right, section 147 is rulemaking authority. in general for the the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Justice, and the Small Business Administration will make rules for the operating procedures and things for businesses that are going to opt into a national framework for legalization. When it comes to regulating the purity, quality, and the labeling on recreational intoxicating products, the FDA would be responsible for doing that not later than 1 year after the date of enactment of this act. And that's pretty much all for section 147. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, section 147 is assigned to the subcommittee on the Weldon Angelos Justice Act. You may proceed to section 148.
All right, and section 148, I'm gonna share again here, deals with expungement. And as we try and address the harms caused by 50 years of the drug war, there are a lot of people who, as Michelle Alexander talks about in the new Jim Crow, have been saddled with drug convictions that carry a lot can carry consequences. And so this section will expunge any completed sentences for federal drug crimes. It'll be done within 1 year from the date of enactment. If you have to have completed your criminal justice sentence, no longer being on probation, parole, supervised release. But if it's all done, then it's automatic that it'll be expunged. Once that's done, the effect of expungement is that you can treat the arrest, conviction, or adjudication as if it never occurred and shall be immune from any civil or criminal penalties related to perjury, false swearing, or false statements for failure to disclose such arrest, conviction, or adjudication. Some districts and some states and things have passed the ban the box laws so that employers can't ask about criminal records on initial applications, so that people who are rejected for previous convictions off the bat can have an opportunity to be better heard and make their pitch why they're the best candidate for the job. Expungement makes that even better in addressing these problems by being able to say that you had not been convicted of a drug crime that's repealed under this section. And those records would also be sealed. I think that concludes my testimony for section 148.
Thank you. I have a question. You said this only applies to completed sentences. People can legally say they've never been convicted of a drug offense. What about people who haven't completed their sentence? Will they get that same protection when they are released?
Yeah, let me try sharing the screen again here. Yeah, so no, they will not automatically get that same protection. And I guess I should say that people who are currently incarcerated for a federal drug crime, when this goes into effect, would not be automatically released. They would just have the opportunity for a sentence review with a rebuttable presumption that they should be released, but it wouldn't be automatic. We'll get into that when we in section 162, I believe. But in this case, they would have to petition the court for expungement if they didn't hit the deadlines to have it done automatically under this section. And then the court shall expunge the adjudication or conviction and any associated arrests, assuming that they meet the definitions under this chapter. So they'd have to ask for it, and then it would be automatic at that point.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, section 148 is assigned to the subcommittee on the Weldon Angelos Justice Act. I'd like to thank the delegate for his testimony today.
You're welcome. Yeah, we didn't talk too much about whether or not the war on drugs should be ended because it's a pretty well established that it should be. So I hope getting into some of the details of exactly how we can do it through this legislative package will help persuade people that the time is now's the time to act and get it done.
And that it can be done, for sure.
It can be done.
All right. The next session of the Phoenix Congress will be held on Monday, February 7th. We'll look at sections 151 and 152 relative to the Espionage Act and the Real ID Act. With that,